Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. It's such a great pleasure to see you all this morning, 10 a.m. Eastern here in Riverdale, and we have a scholar with us today. Before we begin, we just want to let you know we have a monthly scholar in residence with amazing scholars, including this one today. We have also Rachel, who is going to facilitate the Q&A. So let me begin by formally introducing our scholar this morning, Rabbi Din Hollander, who lived in the Netherlands until he moved to New York City in 2000, holds an MA in Arabic and Islamic studies. And I apologize, Rabbi, for butchering the Dutch university, so don't take it personally. I'll try my best using my Nordic and, experience in some languages. Rick, Universiteit Leiden, and a BD from Ichtus Hogeschool Rotterdam. Rabbi Hollander received the rabbinical ordination from YU and from Eliyahu Ben Chaim Yeshiva Badat Zemeko Chaim. And Rabbi Hollander teaches also Jewish literature at Hunter College and medieval Jewish philosophy at Congregation Sheriff Israel, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in Manhattan. It's really a great pleasure to have you two this morning. So I mean, if it was in person, we would say I will hand over the stage or the microphone to you, but because we have a Zoom, we will hand over the screen to you. And we do hope that in the near future, we'll have an opportunity to meet you in person as well. You're always welcome to come, obviously, here to Riverdale, not too far away from where you are. So without further ado, Bechavot, Rabbi Hollander.
Thank you so much for these for your nice introduction. Without further ado, I think we should start because our time is limited, and I'm sure we can't cover everything, but hopefully we'll get a nice impression, some nice impressions of the reception of the Esther story in the Islamic world. I have to say, and start with the fact that it's kind of it looks like a bit of a challenging topic. I'm not saying that I underestimated it, but the hard thing about talking about this is that the Esther story, in contradiction to, if you compare the Hebrew Bible with the Quran, maybe on Abraham or Joseph or Jonah or Job, you can look in the Quran and see what it says about it. But the Esther story does not occur at all in the Quran. So what am I talking about? This could be a very short lecture. However, that doesn't mean that the Esther story did not have any impact in the Islamic world. And so we have to look a bit. We're going to look at the Quran a bit, nonetheless. But we have to look beyond the Quran into other Islamic sources. Let me just start with the modern day and age. We're going to, if time permits, we're going to talk quite a bit about much older sources. But in Iran, in the city of Hamadan, there is a tomb of Esther and Mordechai, and it's a popular pilgrimage place. Not necessarily a Maimonidean idea, but that's all besides the point. Jews go there and to pray at the graves of Esther and Mordechai, and Muslims too. So this is very interesting. Now, in 2008, the Iranian government, in their kindness to the Jews, made this a national heritage site, and it's very kind. However, not everybody was happy with that, and it angered some anti-Jewish elements in Iranian society. And a few years later, there was a big demonstration. And what does it say here on the banner? It says Holocaust of 77,000 Iranians, with big stars of David. Of course, at the end of the Esther story, there is a mention of people, enemies of the Jews, who were killed. Not exactly 77,000, but it's close. So the Esther story is known and is to some extent, and is not received always favorably. Now, another a few years after this was in 2011. 2 years later, and an interesting other thing occurred. This is the Iranian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jawad Zarif, and he, in 2013, he sent a New Year's, a Rosh Hashanah wishes to the Jewish community of Iran. Very kind. However, that was criticized by this gentleman, Muhammad Ali Ramin. And Muhammad Ali Ramin is a notorious Holocaust denier who also, if you recall, had some Nitere Karta people come over to speak with the then Prime Minister what was his name? Ahmadinejad. Okay, so he said, if you begin your term, dear Mr. Zarif, by wishing the Jews a happy new year, you will end up blessing them on Purim, the slaughter of your helpless people by the evil Jews. So this is not a favorable take on the Esther story. And I consider this Islamic sources in some way. Now, and the third modern occurrence I'd like to mention, it's very interesting, has to do with an address that Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, of course, gave to the US Congress in 2015. That was to try to persuade them to not go along with the deal with Iran and not allow them to develop their nuclear facilities. And he said, tomorrow night, on the Jewish holiday of Purim, we will read the book of Esther. We will read of a powerful viceroy named Haman who plotted to destroy the Jewish people some 2,500 years ago. Today, the Jewish people face another attempt by yet another Persian potentate to destroy us. This aforementioned Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Zarif, replied, Benjamin Netanyahu distorts not only the present, but also the past and even the Jewish scriptures. He accuses an entire nation that has saved the Jewish people 3 times. The book of Esther relates how it saved the Jews from a plot hatched by Haman, the Agagite. He says the Agagite, he knows, he must have studied the text, because to call him the Agagite, you really must have read it well. And why does he say, why you mention the Agagite? Because Agagite means not the Persian. It was, so to say, someone else. Cyrus the Great saved the Jews from captivity in Babylon. And during the Second World War, when Jews were slaughtered in Europe, Iran gladly took them in. It was interesting because he actually says here, slaughtered in Europe, going against this person who denies the Holocaust. He actually does say here that, the Jews, that he acknowledges the slaughter of the Jews in the Holocaust. Now, we will look at 3 different sources. The Quran, as I said, we're going to look at some Muslim historians, and if the time permits, we're going to also look at some parallels within ancient Persian storytelling, parallels with the Esther story. The ancient Persian storytelling is also known to us in sources that were written down in the Islamic period. So in a way they are Islamic sources, but maybe not entirely, because they contain very much older pre-Islamic materials. In any case, we'll see if we get to that point, but at least point 1 and 2. Now, let's first look at the Quran. In the Quran, we do have a person called Haman. Even though there is no Esther, there's no Mordechai, there is no Ahasuerus, there is no Zeresh, and there is no Vashti, no Hadassah, nothing. But Haman is mentioned 6 times. Haman in the Quran is a boastful person who is the infidel, a corrupt person, and a high-ranking assistant of, not of a king in Persia, but of Pharaoh. Now, some people would think, I would think, excuse me, this is a bit of a mistake in the Quran, right? And to go on, This Pharaoh in the Quran tells Haman in two of the 6 instances that he has to build for Pharaoh a huge tower from which Pharaoh could look into heaven to see that the God of Israel does not exist. So it seems that things are conflagrated a bit. So we have the Tower of Babel in Egypt. We have Pharaoh, and this is the Pharaoh of the time of Moses, and Haman together, and a whole different period. And Korach is also mentioned in two verses. And then we have maybe Nimrod in the Jewish tradition. Nimrod was in Midrashim responsible for the Tower of Babel. So all these things are come together. And we have maybe a confusion between Egypt and Persia, Babel, and Korach in the Sinai desert. So different times and different places. So you would think this is a big mistake, and Christian missionaries try to score big on the internet. There's a lot of controversy by people saying to the Islam, see, your religion is Islam, doesn't even have the times right. And then there are Muslim, apologists who say, no, this is the word of God. And of course, God is not mistaken, does not confuse 1,000 years and 2,000 kilometers. So you must have misunderstood it. So this Haman that is talked about in Egypt and your Haman in the Bible, maybe your Bible is wrong, but it could also be 2 different people with the same name. That is now the take that Muslims nowadays take in order to defend their position. Go back a bit to rather modern times. This is a photo of a doctor, a physician, Maurice Bucaille, who lived, as you see, from 1920 to 1998. And he was a doctor to all kinds of rulers in the Middle East. And he was also a amateur Egyptologist, and discovered that there was someone in Egypt who was called Haman. And he was in charge of building projects. And he said, this is amazing. Quote, a 7th century Arabian, meaning Muhammad, could never have known this. And yet it appears in the Quran. And this was so convincing for him that this was for him clear proof that the Quran was divinely inspired. And he converted to Islam. And of course, he is quoted with great pride by some Muslims. Now, I think that Haman is not, I'm not too impressed with it, because there's quite a number of people in Egypt with that have the name Amen or Aman of Amun in them, because Aman or Amen is an Egyptian name of a god, the god of the heaven and the god of the sun, and Amen means the invisible. So Amun, Amon, Amen, the invisible one, and sometimes called Amun-Re. We have Amenhotep. We have different pharaohs called Amenhotep and Tutankhamun, which is all has that same name. And then here's Amenhotep, here is Tutankhamun. All right. We can point out perhaps. So the question is, how did Haman move from Achaemenid period in Persia to pharaonic Egypt? How was, because you can say there are 2 different people, but in all honesty, this is a modern answer. Throughout the ages, Muslim commentators have all identified the Haman of the Quran with the Haman, all, I have to say almost all, with the Haman of the Quran, with the Haman of the Hebrew Bible. And so the question is, how did he end up in the Quran in Egypt? This seems to be a little strange. First, we could point out that there are some literary parallels, as many people have pointed out already. Of course, this is not, I'm not hardly bringing anything new in this. This is all stolen from other scholars, of course. Pointed out that there are literary parallels between the story of Esther and the story of Joseph. First of all, both of them are located in a different country, and they rise to great positions and to great prominence. And both of them use their position to save their people. And there are some other parallels, which it would be almost a lecture in itself to compare those two. There's even some terms that only occur in the Hebrew Bible in those two contexts. So I know one at the top of my head, pekidim. No, pekudim is another word, but pekidim occurs in Genesis 41:34 and in Esther 2 verse 3. So good. We'll go to the next slide. Here we are. Now let's go to some historians. There's an historian, Al-Maqdisi, who lived from 945 to 990. This is early. This is the time of Sa'ad Gaon, basically. And so there's a number of them that say that the Pharaoh of Egypt in the time of Moses, he say, was an Amalekite. So Haman was an Amalekite. That's in our Hebrew Bible, one of the main underlying themes, right? So Amalek, he's called the Agagite, and we know that Agag was the last surviving king of the Amalekites, killed by Samuel. But then there are still Amalekites later, so the question is, maybe there were some descendants, whatever. So the idea is that Haman was an Amalekite. Now, King Saul was the one who was charged by God to kill the Amalekites, and he had left Agag alive. So he didn't finish the job. And so what happened? So it's very interesting, and that in the second chapter of Esther, we have the text, Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan habira ushmo Mordechai. There was a Jewish man in Shushan, the capital of Shushan, and his name was Mordechai ben Yair ben Shimei ben Kish Ishimini. He was a Benjaminite from the son of Shimei, son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish. Now Kish was also the father of Benjamin, of King Saul, and so. And Saul was also from the tribe of Benjamin. So one of the underlying ideas in the story of Esther is that Mordechai is a second cousin, third removed or something from King Saul, so somewhat of a descendant, and he's finishing the job that Saul didn't do. So it's like a continuation of that old story. So the fact that he was an Amalekite, and Al-Maqdisi says Pharaoh was an Amalekite too, so they were really related. And then there is another text, Al-Qurtubi, I didn't write that down, says that it's been told that Pharaoh was the title of all Amalekite rulers. So there are two historians who try to make a connection between Haman, who was an Amalekite, and Pharaoh, who was, according to them, also an Amalekite. It's very possible. I have a lot of my information from an excellent book by, a scholarly book by Adam Silverstein. It's rather new. It's called Veiling Esther, Unveiling Her Story. I have to give credit and not pretend that I did all the research myself. I'm just the one who presents it, and the shaliach in a way. But he points out that it's very possible that Haman in antiquity was a nickname for evil people in general. And it's also possible that, and we will see if time permits us, and time goes so fast that I doubt it, there could be maybe a part 2, I don't know, that it's very possible that evil people were nicknamed Haman, and that could have been, and so Haman could have been a nickname after the fact in our story, according to him. It's not saying that, but it's implied in what he's writing. And that would be because of an old Babylonian myth, a creation myth, where two Babylonian gods battle a Elamite god. The Babylonian gods are Marduk and Ishtar, and it sounds very similar to Mordechai and Esther, of course. And the Elamite god that they that they battled and destroyed was called Haman. Now, isn't that remarkable, right? We have a Jewish name of Esther, Hadassah. We don't have a Jewish name for Mordechai. Now, Mordechai, if you ask somebody on the street what's your name, and he says, my name is Mordechai, you think he's Jewish, but it's a very pagan name in a way, right? I don't know. I hope I'm not insulting anyone here who might be have the name Mordechai, but is named after the god Marduk. So I guess our hero of the story, and Esther is also, her name is Hadassah. Esther is a very popular name. If I had been a girl, my mother would have wanted to name me Esther. So I have to empathize a little bit with that name. So okay. So I guess our heroes in our story kashered the name. Good. Now, let me continue. There's another thing that's very interesting. Let's look at this map of the old Persian Empire around the time of when the Esther story is dated. This is the story, and it says in the Megillah, Hamolech me Hodu va'ad Kush. From India, you see on the right the Indus River. That's Hodu. It's really where the Indus River. Va'ad Kush, and Kush is further to the south of Egypt a bit. That's Ethiopia. So that includes Egypt, right? So he was the Shah of Persia, of Iran, was also the ruler of Egypt at that time. And actually, there was a Shah, one of the Artaxerxes. So Achashverosh, by the way, is the Hebrew attempt to pronounce the Greek Xerxes. And Xerxes is a Greek attempt to pronounce the Persian name, which was Chashayar Shah. That was really Chashayar Shah, became Xerxes, became Achashverosh. So Xerxes is the king that's mostly known as Xerxes through the Greek. Historically, is the king that plays a role in that's really our Achashverosh. Now, the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation, also Jewish Greek translation of the Bible, is called the Septuagint. A few hundred years before the Common Era, has a different version of it, has quite a few differences in the Esther story, particularly. And instead of Xerxes, they have Artaxerxes. So, and Artaxerxes, there was an Artaxerxes who actually crowned himself Pharaoh of Egypt and started one of the dynasties of Egypt. So the fact that Haman was in the Quran, the advisor of, and also head of his army of Pharaoh, if it's Artaxerxes, with a little stretch, you could say it's true, because the king of the Shah was also at the same time Pharaoh. Perhaps it's a suggestion. Good. Now let's. How did historians deal with the discrepancy if they want to integrate when they're writing these Muslim historians? They are writing the history of the world, part 1, right? So so they have their Quran, which says that there was a Haman, and as I said, most of them did not dissociate these two Hamans. They thought it was the same person. They had a Haman, according to the Quran, in Egypt. And then they want to integrate this Jewish history also because it's part of history, and their Haman is in Iraq or in Persia. So how do they integrate this discrepancy of information? So there's a few different approaches. Some of them just totally ignored it. It's not Al-Isfahani, Al-Mas'udi, Al-Yaqubi. If that rings any bell, probably not. It's definitely probably not for the majority of us. And but there are a number of them that just ignore it, that don't mention the story of Esther at all. So not so interesting to talk about. The second approach would be that to integrate some themes from the Esther story and to put them in the description of Pharaonic Egypt. So it's a bit more interesting. Here we have Al-Kisai, who wrote around the year 1000. It's also quite a few years ago. And his quote, and it's a little quote: "The first to bow before Pharaoh was Iblis." Iblis is a Hebrew word, but it comes probably from the Greek diabolos, which means the devil. And the devil who called him Lord, who called Pharaoh Lord. Pharaoh, according to the Quran, didn't believe in God, and he made himself God. After him, Haman and all the viziers. Viziers is Hebrew, as Arabic, for those who don't know the word, ministers. All the viziers and soothsayers bowed down. Then he called the elders of the Israelites, who came and prostrated before him. Pharaoh called the priests of Israel and said to them, "I have heard that you obey me outwardly, but inwardly you disobey me. Bow down to me, or I will punish you with multiple torture." The story goes on that they refused and they were all executed. Now, then Pharaoh has a change of mind. Later he says to Haman, "Bring me Amram." So not Mordechai, but Amram, the father of Moses. Amram, who is their chief. So Amram came, and Amram was made Grand Vizier. And Haman and the rest of the viziers were placed under him. So there's a few themes of the Esther story that are basically there. Pharaoh here is our Haman. He demands to be bowed down to, right? And most people do, but only a few people don't. Now come Amram, who is really our Mordechai, who is placed above Haman, and so it's a bit. There are some things that in our story, yes, Mordechai was also placed. The Grand Vizier was also the second in charge, and here Haman is lowered. He's not put to death here, but still he is. He's on a lower point, and Amram here is the Jewish hero is made the top dog, basically. Okay, a third approach would be telling the Esther story in Persia, not in Egypt, with minor differences. Comes a bit closer, right? So we have Mamluk historians. Mamluk historians, that means Mamluk is like a period, like a dynasty of that started with ex-slaves, and they ruled over Egypt and often also big chunks of the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, Syria, etc., etc. There is minor differences, as I said. I'm not going to have long quotes here because there's other things that are maybe better, but it's really interesting what they did with the king. The Persian king is not Khashayar-Shah, the Xerxes, but Ardashir, which is the Arabic word and the Persian word for Artaxerxes. So they seem to follow the Septuagint version of the story of Esther, which was written in Alexandria, which is, of course, a big center in Egypt. And this is where the Mamluks had their center. So maybe there was still some Alexandrian influence. It's a bit of a stretch, maybe, but who knows? And how do they reconcile that Haman, contrary to the Quran, would be in Persia? They left Haman as a description in Egypt, and our Haman they call Haimun. So, and then some of them actually say his name was Haimun, but the Jews call him Haman. So that comes closer. I'm going to mention a fourth approach. They would tell the Esther story, but they leave out Haman completely. So if you have Haman and he has to be in Egypt, just leave that point out. Of course, a big part of the intrigue of the story is lost, but this is interesting. At-Tabari, who lived in the 9th and 10th century, possibly the most influential Muslim historian, and he wrote a history of the world, and which is still read. And and also a very influential Quran commentator, by the way. He writes that Ahasuerus, and according to him, was nicknamed the Sage, ruled under another, by the way, under another ruler, higher ruler, Bahman. We're going to see him hopefully still. He ruled over part of Persia under Bahman. Oh yeah, here it is. I already said that. He actually married a woman of the Israelite captives, Esther bint Abihail, the daughter of Abihail. She was raised by an uncle who was also her milk brother. Everybody in Crown Heights and in the Riverdale Minyan, many people would say this is taken from a German, Milch brother. So it doesn't mean, that means that milk siblings are people who have been nursed by the same nurse, by the same wet nurse, and you become milk brother and sister. So according to him, Esther and Mordechai were nursed by the same woman, and therefore they were milk siblings. They had a son, Cyrus, who learned Torah from Mordechai and embraced the faith of the Israelites, according to Tabari. He studied under Daniel, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, all known from the book of Daniel. He made Daniel a judge and gave him all his power, and he began the reconstruction of Jerusalem. So here there's no intrigue, there's no threat of the Jewish people by an evil minister at all. Esther is named, and Mordechai is named, and it's all a happy ending. Now, what about the term milk brother? In Islam, this plays an important role, because if you are nursed by the same mother, you actually become, to some extent, brother and sister, and the wet nurse that nursed you becomes your milk mother. Actually, you have to also honor her as your mother, and her husband is your milk father, and you are milk siblings. That means you're not allowed to marry each other. This is a very tragic story of people who had been married for years, and they found out that they had been once or twice nursed by the same woman, and they were forced to divorce. So according to Islamic law. And by the way, it played a bigger role in Christian history also than today. This is a portrait of King Louis XIV of France as a young child with his milk sister, Henriette of England. So if they weren't related, the English and the French monarchy, these wet nurses, through using the same wet nurse, they still forged some kind of a familiar bond. And there's something else to it. Here's a slide that I used for my video of Esther. So I made a copy of this slide. I made a video of the book of Esther, but more, not going to talk about that. See? So, he, Mordechai, was a omen at Adasa, or was omening Adasa. Now, it has the same root as amen, of ma'amin, but omen is a weird term. Omenet means to nurse, if a woman is nursing. So there is something to do with nursing. So a man cannot omen, really. So maybe arranged for a wet nurse, or there are midrashim that actually say that, Mordechai nursed her, and it was a miracle, so that he had milk to nurse her. So he omen et hadasa. So Tabari must have known something of that. So he seems to have, and there might have been other interpreters in the Jewish world that they heard it from, that to say that there's something to do with milk here in their relationship. Solve the problem by making them milk siblings. Okay, enough about that. Enough already. Good. Then there are a few historians, this is the fifth and last approach, who incorporate the Esther story without significant changes. El-Biruni, who died in 1048. Many of these people, we don't know when they're born, nobody paid attention, but we know when they died. He says, this Haman was an enemy of the Jews. He asked the soothsayers, which was the unluckiest time of the Jews. He said, in Adar, their master Moses died. And the unluckiest time of this month is the 14th and the 15th. This is not in the story of Esther, but it is a somewhat famous midrash. So there are midrashim that of Agadot that actually say this. I think it's even in the Babylonian Talmud. The rest, he goes on, and the rest is pretty much the same story. That Esther invites him the third day. Then he says, she pleads for his life. The king says, "Who is it?" It's this Haman. The king thinks that he goes away. Everything is the same. And here we have Ibn Khaldun, who died. Lived like 400 years later, or no, 300 years later, a bit more. Died in 1406. So he describes that. He says that from the reign of Cyrus onwards, he places Cyrus before the time of Esther. Some people say Cyrus was their son, but he says before, Persian kings would supply the Jews with all that they needed for the temple service. And then he continues, except for a short lapse during the reign of Ahasuerus. His vizier was Haman, who was an Amalekite. Saul had sought to depose them by God's order. And for this reason, Haman was opposite to the Jews and plotted to destroy them. Mordechai, who was one of their leaders, had married off his milk sister to Ahasuerus and encouraged her to besiege the king to save her nation. He accepted this and returned things to the way they were. I have 2 more minutes. Okay, maybe 3. So I'm going to just touch a little bit on ancient Persian storytelling. And this is a Dutch Arabist, Michael Jan de Goeie. And he wrote an article in the late 1800s, 1886, and he drew attention to parallels that exist between the Esther story and the stories of 1001 Nights. And this is very tempting because I've recently been reading it, 1001 Night again, and there are definitely interesting parallels. Okay. King Shahryar, and sometimes they call him King Bahman, King Bahman is in later sources that we don't have time to look at, also portrayed as Ahasuerus or above Ahasuerus. He had a beautiful wife who was unfaithful to him. When he found out, he had to put her to death. As a result, he becomes lonesome, but he never again wants to give his heart to a woman. That's in 1001 Nights. Then he has his vizier bring him a fresh virgin every night. Similar to our story, but with whom he sleeps, similar. And then he has her beheaded the next morning, not similar. But putting away somebody in a harem is not everybody's vocation also. The king's daughter, Shahrazad, volunteers, and she asked during the night, "Can I tell you a story, king?" Now the king wants a change of regime and says, "Yes, sure." So she tells a very exciting, interesting story, and she ends with a cliffhanger. And then he continues the next night, or an open end. So the king wants to hear the continuation, and it goes on for 1001 Nights. And finally, the king decides to keep her, and they have a child, and they live happily ever after. She becomes the king. In many versions of the story, there's different versions, this girl is actually Jewish and becomes a Jewish queen. And there are sources that actually identify her with Esther, who's also called in other stories Himyar, but there's also stories that Esther and Himyar are also the same person. And there's more parallels, like the Esther story. For the sin of one woman, here Vashti, the queen, many women are punished. There's a law that all women have to always obey them, and all these virgins are have to sleep with the Shah, with the king, and are put into a harem. And like Esther, Shahrazad saves her people, saves a lot of girls, and saves all the families from sorrow. But it's in a different way. And then there are also long descriptions of the beauty of the palace and of long festivities and all the foods and all the drinking and the tapestry and there's a lot of these interesting and there's subplots in 1001 Night. There is a little subplot about the 2 eunuchs who try to depose of the king, and so that's also very interesting. In any case, I think I have a bunch of more sources, but we're going to call this a lecture. I think we want to leave some room for Q&A. And maybe this is a good time to do that, Rachel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Son Hollander.
Welcome.
That was extremely interesting, and a lot of this stuff leads to asking for additional information, because it's like, really? So if anyone has a question, you can put it into the chat. And if you would stop sharing your screen, if someone wants to raise their hand, I'd be able to see it also.
And then, of course, unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
Right, you have to unmute yourself to ask a question. So if anyone does have, or raise your hand if you can, and I'll ask, we'll see it. So if there are any questions, which
if there's no questions, I can finish probably my slides.
Say, why don't, there are no questions. So if anyone does have, if in the middle of while you're continuing, someone has a question, they can raise your hand. But why don't you continue?
Can you see me or hear me?
I can hear you.
Sarah Jesselson?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Somehow or other, I can't get it to work with raising
No problem.
In any case, I read a number of years ago a short article by Mitchell First, who's the son of Lee First.
Yeah.
And first of all, I found it very hard to follow, but he was basically saying that there's only one source I gathered in the Persian archives about a woman who might be Esther, and it was very unflattering, which of course, considering that it's generally speaking my favorite story, in all of Tanakh, I was a little unhappy about. So I was wondering if you have any information about his sources and want to comment.
Well, actually, that was the last few of the slides. Shall I answer your question by continuing?
However you please, I'll mute myself.
Rachel?
You can, why don't you just do it? Because I have another question. Someone else just raised their hand. So why don't you go through those few?
Okay, I'll do my best to pack this into the last 15 minutes, and I think we might succeed. There are a few there are a few sources that do appear in the Islamic world. Here's the Shahnameh, meaning the book, the Shah book, literally. It dates from the 11th century in its current form, but it has pre-Islamic, it's almost all pre-Islamic material, and some are from remote antiquity. And the Shahnameh might help us understand the meaning of a few things. The meaning of an obscure term in the Megillah. You have the Harechesh, Rochebe Harechesh, riders of the Rechesh. Now, it's sometimes translated as the riders of the royal steeds, but there's much controversy of what this really means. So the literal meaning is very unclear. In the Shahnameh, there's a legendary hero, and there's also also occurs in other sources. Likewise, Rostam is a legendary hero who fights for the Persians, Rostam, and he has a famous horse, and the horse is called Raksh. Now, Raksh, Rakash, Rachash, Rechesh. If you put the word Raksh into grammatically and into Hebrew, this would come out as Rechesh. So some people say this is referred to this famous horse, Rechesh or Raksh. Perhaps it's good. Then it's very interesting. The Shahnameh talks about historical rival between Iran and its arch enemy Turan. So for the Iranians, Turan, the people, the nation of Turan, is similar as to us, Amalek. And the commander of the Turians, of these Turanians, is called Haman. So here we have a Haman, perhaps, maybe Haman, who he advises the Turian king to attack the Iranians. This Haman then fights Rostam, who rides as Raksh or Rechesh, and he is killed and beheaded. So here Haman tries to kill the good people, and he is killed and beheaded as he wanted to kill other people himself. A bit of a parallel maybe in our Haman in our story. A second source is the Bahman Nameh, the book of Bahman. We already saw Bahman as in one of the sources as somebody under whom Ahasuerus would have ruled, according to one of these Muslim historians. This tells of an ancient Persian king, Bahman, who marries a Jewess. Homai, who is, as I said briefly before, equated often with Esther. And Homai succeeds him as a ruler and delivered her people from captivity. So a Jewish queen who becomes powerful, who takes over the power, and who frees her people. Now, At-Tabari, which is a Muslim historian, interprets this text, and many medieval Persian Jewish poets also, they all identify this with Queen Esther. So that's very interesting. Esther is known by name as, this is your question, right? Was it only named once or twice? It's not known by name, but identified perhaps as Esther here. Bahman's first wife was a princess from Kashmir. She brings with her from her court in Kashmir a certain person called Lulu, but she is secretly her lover. Now the princess convinces Bahman to appoint Lulu as his vizier and as head of his army and his treasury. He becomes very powerful. But then Lulu, of course, gets too powerful and tries a coup against Bahman. Bahman then flees to Egypt, where he meets Homai, the Jewish princess. And he raises an army, returns to Iran, and then defeats Lulu. Okay, this is the story. Darab Nameh, Homai, or Esther, and Bahman have a son, Darab, which is a Persian for Darius. Two emirs tried to kill the king. So this is the plot of the eunuchs, maybe. But the king's brother has them shot with arrows and hanged. So the evil people are hanged. That is also appears in our story. And then here we have a book called Samake Ayar, Samak the Vagabond. Two functionaries are also here, plot to kill the king. A third one reveals it to the king, and the plotters are killed. So this is very parallel to our story of our subplot of the two eunuchs. There's a vizier who's called Haman Wazir, but this doesn't seem to be inspired by our Esther story, because Haman here is not a villain. He's actually a wise person and kind and tries to avoid war. So that is remarkable. It's a proof that it's not based on our story. It's just any parallel between the two stories is maybe must be explained in another way. Let's say that. There is parallels. There is also a week-long celebration, and there are feasts, and that people distribute treats. Can we put this on mute? Sorry. And then, I had this. This is already. This is a repeat. Okay, good. Now I come to my conclusion. So even though the Esther story does not appear in the Quran, there are still sources in the Islamic world, notably writings of Muslim historians, that cover it. The discrepancy between the different locations and times, Quran versus Hebrew Bible, in which Haman appears, is dealt with by these historians in very different ways. Interesting are several parallels that can be found in Persian sources, which contain pre-Islamic material that show many of the themes that also appear in Esther. So I doesn't really totally address your question, but so it's all on the interpretation, right? So there are So Esther isn't mentioned by name, but there are names like there's another source, some other sources I didn't mention because I was already pretty sure I wouldn't have enough time to do that. But so there are allusions perhaps to our Queen Esther. At least commentators and Jews of Persia in the Middle Ages have identified Homai and other persons with Esther. So it's only half an answer to your question. Yeah. Rachel again.
Okay, we have one other. We do have one question. Esther Saban, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Esther?
Yeah, so I wanted to know, actually, you started off with you started off with the tomb of Esther and Mordecai. What is the situation now with the terribly anti-Israel regime?
Yeah, anti-Israel, but not necessarily anti-Jewish. I mean, if you're not a member of the state of Israel, and if you're not, those people in Iran who do not proclaim to be Zionist, and there are, I think, there's always members of Jewish members in parliament. That's a sure thing. So there's always has to be at least one Jew in the parliament. That's not in most cases in most countries, and so there's not as many. If normally all Jews would go to elections and vote for one person, there wouldn't be enough votes to get somebody in parliament. But there's always anti-Israel. I don't think so much anti-Jewish. I've met people who recently came from Iran to the West, and they say, we can have rather comfortable lives. It's not, there are always people. It's always hard to, of course, to make a distinction between Jews and of Israel and outside of Israel. So, a hatred against Israel is easily inflamed and into a hatred against Jews in general. And so that's what you see in that demonstration, probably, because it wasn't about Israel, it was about Judaism. That demonstration we saw. But the government kept it as a national heritage, and everything calmed down as far as we know. And so there's no critical situation as far as I'm informed. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I also wanted to ask a linguistic question.
In the Arabic music, when you enjoy the music, you say Haman, Haman, Haman. Is there any connection between this word and to Haman?
No, I don't think. Haman is actually I think either Turkish. It's not really Arabic, although Arabs have taken it. Means oi oi oi. Yeah.
I see. And the other thing is that it used to be Persia has the biggest Jewish community. Now it's dwindled to maybe 7,000. That's it. So I don't know if they are so well accepted in Persia. How come most of them immigrated?
Well, it's that I will have to ask these people. It's often business opportunities, or I don't think it's because of persecution. But of course, like it's maybe like in Morocco, and so this is about modern politics. It wasn't really the topic, and I didn't really do extensive research about that. But I've heard people from Morocco who came, who left in the 50s, and they said, well, there was really nothing bad happening, but we were afraid. There's in other countries we saw bad things. We thought it might happen in Morocco, and that's why they left. And so it's also possible, it can be okay now, but it could also be like, you never know what happens one day. And so maybe it's safer to go somewhere else. I don't know. And nobody told me who came recently from Persia, and I interviewed a few people, that there was active persecution going on right now. But yeah, there could be all kinds of reasons. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And that is going to be the end of the lecture. I greatly appreciate it. And I think we all have a lot of food for thought.
Okay, very, very nice. I thank you for the honor of inviting me to speak to your community. And it was a pleasure. And so I wish you all blessings and a happy Purim, most of all. May this be a time of great joy and simcha. And hopefully, the compassionate and joyful part of sharing and thinking about the poor will be noticed and will be more prominent in even our Muslim friends, would be visible, and that they will not, they would see us in a positive light in the way we celebrate our holidays, and especially Purim, with dignity and kindness and charity. So I hope that light that we have received will shine brightly, and that's all to all of us personally to make that work. So thank you so much. I'm sorry I put in a little sermon, but that just came spontaneous.
Thank you very much. It's much appreciated in either case. Anyhow, thank you very much. Everyone else, everyone have a good week, and thank you very much for participating.